Thank you very much for joining us for the latest in our series of new season club volunteer induction sessions. This week, looking at the role of a club treasurer in grassroots football. Before I get started, I wanted to say a massive thank you to you for volunteering and putting your hand up to take on the role of a treasurer within a grassroots football club. Without volunteers such as yourselves taking part, putting your hands up and getting involved, we wouldn't be able to keep the game we love going to the level that we currently are able to. So a massive thank you before we get started for being here. So there's a couple of things we are going to look at on the session today. First is I'm just going to introduce the role of the County FA, who we are at Berks and Bucks, what our responsibility is and what we're here to do. We then look at the role of the treasurer. So I've broken that down into three key areas. First is around the responsibilities for budgeting, and we've got a couple of tips to help you out with that. Particularly when it comes to budgeting for ongoing disciplinary cases, and that's particularly relevant for adult teams. We then look at day-to-day finances and annual reporting responsibilities. We'll then close off by taking a look at the FA technology systems that are out there and what they can do to help with managing the finances of the club. So before we get going into your role, we'll talk about our role here at the County FA. So here at Berks and Bucks, we really do see ourselves as central to the grassroots football pyramid. As you can see, we kind of sit there right in the middle, working very closely with the FA, who sit above us as the national governing body, and then working with all of the clubs and leagues that affiliate within our county. We are then delegated responsibility and authority by the FA to develop and govern local football. In exchange, we then represent local interests back up to the FA through various working groups and through a representative on the FA Council to make sure that your voice in Berks and Bucks is then heard at a national level. As I say, we then affiliate all clubs and leagues that are based in our county, and through that, we support the local volunteers with keeping the game going effectively, support through kind of technology side of things, any regulatory or governance issues that may come up, and anytime that that relationship perhaps may need some support. So fully understand that throughout the course of the season, it's the leagues that are delivering football week in, week out, getting games going, but sometimes decisions may be taken or issues may crop up, and then we can support that relationship between the club and the league, whether it's through working with both parties to resolve any issues or through a more formal league appeal process. So as you can see, we are really central to keeping that whole infrastructure and pyramid running. Moving on to your role now as a treasurer in a grassroots football club. We always do a role in a nutshell, just a 2 or 3 line summation of what your role is. And the treasurer is probably the most purely administrative and functional of the key roles in grassroots football. So effectively, you're there to handle those day-to-day financial transactions, administrations on behalf of the club, and make sure that there is financial integrity within the organisation. So that will be things like making and receiving all the payments on behalf of the club, but also then recording every transaction and reporting back on those transactions back to the members each year. And that is done through presenting your audited financial statements to the club members at the AGM. I'm going to start, first of all, with just some very, very basic budgeting. I fully recognise that football can be an expensive business. And so we are really only looking at this from the most basic level. Obviously, the bigger you are as a club, the more senior you are, the more leagues you participate in, the more players you have, the more complicated your financial situation is going to be. But what we're trying to strip it down to is just that fundamental balancing the books here. So each season, you will see various fixed expenses that come in once a year. So those will be things like your affiliation and insurance fees to us at the County FA, membership fees to the league, and then potentially any player registration fees you may have with the league. On a weekly basis, then, you will have pitch hire costs, referee fees, and refreshments. So, things that keep us going week in, week out on the side of the pitch. And then finally, you have your more ad hoc occasional expenses. So things like kit and equipment, depending on how long they last, what condition they're in, what replacements you may need, or what you're looking to do in terms of growth and development. Balanced alongside that then are your kind of relatively fixed income and then potential additional income opportunities. So most clubs will operate under a system where you have annual membership dues and then match day subs from the players. And then you'll have more ad hoc income areas such as potential sponsorship, may not be guaranteed, or maybe in kind, grants, which again may be very much project specific, and then potentially summer tournaments or other kind of fundraising activities you may run as a club. And where you start to balance it up is very much in trying to see where you can match those different aspects up. So things like your annual affiliation and league entry fees, your insurance, your startup costs, really you should be coming out of your annual membership dues. That way everything is bundled up in the summer. When it comes in, when it goes out, it's all sorted before you actually start the season. Your pitch or your match expenses then, pitch hire, refreshments fees, referees, would really come out of those match day subs. You want to make sure that for every given fixture, you're setting those subs at a level that you're confident that if you get all of your players turn up or enough of your players turn up to field a team, that actually that is then going to translate into being able to cover those expenses for running the game that week. And then that leaves sponsorship and grants and other fundraising activities to cover off those big ticket items, things like kit and equipment. It's also worth bearing in mind that a lot of those fees will be per team as well. So it's always important that serious conversations at hand and consideration is given to growing the club and having additional teams. A lot of the time, a team manager may get some new players in and run away with themselves thinking, this is excellent, we can go out and we can put a new team in the league. Brilliant. What they may not understand through a coach's mindset is the additional cost that's then going to incur in terms of those buying a second kit or 2 sets of kit for that new team, the additional pitch high costs for training every week, for playing the games, the additional entry fees, the additional insurance that's going to come up, and whether that will actually be balanced up by those strands of income. So we always say it's important that any decisions around adding new teams, growing the club, is actually made at a club management level between the senior club officers, so your chair, your secretary, your treasurer, and so forth, where you've got that bigger picture understanding of the impact on the club. Hopefully that makes sense. I'm not going to go into more detail than that. As I say, it is a very basic budgeting, and we can't cater to every eventuality, but hopefully that gives you a fair expectation or understanding about how you might want to look at balancing the books, particularly if you are a new club getting started. Moving on to the day-to-day finances then, it's important to track all payments in and out and maintain effective records of the transactions. Particularly at the larger clubs, you may actually be dealing quite a bit of money on an annual basis, coming in and going out. And that obviously takes on a little bit of responsibility. And by keeping records, you are also protecting yourself as a volunteer. A lot of the time, you have to make sure that those records are in place that are being reported back to the club members. And by having that transparency, you will gain the trust of your members in your ability to manage the finances and the way you conduct yourself and manage the club. So it's important to track all of those payments and report back on those on a regular basis. What we really want to avoid through a lot of this is that actually individual volunteers, whether it's the chair, the secretary, or the treasurer, are incurring personal debts because of the club activities. Best way again to avoid that is to ensure everything is tracked, and then if you are incurring a cost on behalf of the club, that is reimbursed promptly and transparently. Ideally, yourself as the treasurer would not be the one paying out of a personal account, but reimbursing another individual, whether it's the chair, the secretary, coach, that maybe does make that payment. This way, you've always got a check and a challenge, and you're not putting yourself in a potentially conflicted position or opening yourself up to potential criticism. You also be responsible probably for collecting and accounting for subs or annual membership fees, and again reporting back as to at the AGM as to how those funds have then been used. And then the big one is discipline. Discipline was something that was not on that very basic budgeting structure that I shared a moment ago, and that is because it is a great unknown, effectively. Clubs that have been around will have a sense about kind of an average number of red and yellow cards that you may pick up during the season, but it's something that's very difficult to budget for in advance. So it's something you may therefore want to consider an internal policy around managing it after the fact when those types of incidents do occur. So as I say, it's a variable expense and one that's probably best kept separate from a club budget. We do recommend that fines are actually passed on to the individual, particularly in adult football. So red and yellow cards are part and parcel of football. We have to accept that they occur, and every offence will carry with it a financial penalty imposed by the FA, ranging from £12 for a caution up to potentially £55 for a red card, or even a three-figure sum for a serious misconduct offence. Now, if that is then not paid, in adult football, it's both the club and the player that are placed under suspension, and in youth football, the club would be placed under suspension. So it's important to make sure that those fines are paid promptly to the county FA, but we have no issue with, and we do recommend passing those fines on to the individual, because again, it should be individual responsibility for their behaviour rather than coming out of the pocket potentially of club administrators such as yourselves. What we do recommend is that you also watch the accumulation of offences. I'll come on to that in a bit more detail as to why that is so important. Mentioned before, a caution is £12, regardless of the nature of the caution. Only exception is if it's dealt with through a sin bin, where there's no fine. But that £12 caution could actually accumulate towards several other offences and several other fines. So if a team hits 75 disciplinary points over the course of the season, you'll receive an additional misconduct charge and a fine from the county FA. Likewise, if you hit 6, 10, 15 or 20 respect offences or incur multiple multiplayer misconduct fines. So what we're going to look at is how one of those offences could quite quickly start costing an awful lot more than that initial fine that comes through. Mentioned about respect offences, these are cautions for dissent, red cards for abusive language or gestures, or proven misconduct charges. Now, each of these stages on the screen include a £15 administration fee on top of that fine. And you can see that quite quickly those sums start ratcheting up, particularly if you are playing at a higher level of football. Even at grassroots level, so outside National League system or youth, if you hit 10 respect offences, you're actually going to be facing a £50 fine. And if you hit 15 offences, you're going to be facing a £100 fine. There would be a misconduct charge at stage 4. And although that is then a fine at the discretion of a disciplinary panel, it is not going to be below the £100 stage 3 fine. So as you can see, those sums quite quickly start adding up. Likewise, multiplayer misconduct fines. This is if you have 6 or more players cautioned or sent off in a match. These fines are then automatic. Again, looking outside National League system, if it happens 2 or 3 times in a season, you're going to be picking up £50, £75 fines each time that then happens. Mentioned before as well, just around club misconduct charges, 75 disciplinary points, 4 or more proven incidents of violent conduct within a team, 2 abandonments or 2 charges against its players for aggravated misconduct charge. If you meet any of those thresholds, you will receive a standalone misconduct charge from the county FA. That will typically lead to a fine ranging from about £75 up to £150, depending on the nature of the offence and your level in football. I'm going to try and put some of these in some practical examples. So first up, we have John. John is a player for a local Saturday men's side playing at step 5. Picks up a red card for abusive language towards the referee. Now that brings with it a standard fine of £40. So he will know quite soon after the match, picked up that £40 fine. The club, however, have waited until John has given them the money before they pay back the county FA, and they have missed that deadline for making payment, which is 14 days after the invoice is raised. This means that they've incurred a 25% late fee, so an extra £10. Now, that red card will also contribute towards respect charges against the club later in the season, and an E20 charge for reaching 75 points. This is where suddenly you get double, triple, quadruple jeopardy for a single offence. So if the club were to reach 15 respect offences across the course of the season, and that 75 points threshold, suddenly that £40 red card is contributing towards a couple of £100 worth of disciplinary fines in total. And you can see we put down there kind of John's portion of the fine. So he's responsible for the whole of the red cards, the whole of the late fee. But by the time we get to the R15 respect charge, he's responsible for 1/15 of that. He's responsible for 4 of those 75 penalty points. So suddenly John's £40 red card is actually costing him or the club or in general has cost £71.47. So it's important as a club that you are aware of these accumulation charges and have a policy in place as to how you're going to deal with them going forward. Practical example number 2. This is Sarah. These names have been picked purely out of a hat, and the fact that my flatmate is called Sarah, so I'll get to write her into this as a poorly behaved player. But Sarah plays for an adult women's team within a large club. During a major confrontation, she is seen striking an opposition player and is shown a red card for violent conduct. So standard £55 fine for that. However, she is one of 6 players cautioned or sent off for her team that day, which means that they pick up the first offence for a multiplayer misconduct charge, which is £15 admin fee and a warning. And then over the course of the season, 3 other teammates receive red cards for violent conduct, resulting in an £80 fine and £15 admin fee for an E20 charge. Once again, we can see that Sarah is responsible for 1/2 of the red card, 1/6 of that £15 admin fee, and then 1/4 of that £95 violent conduct accumulation charge. Suddenly her £55 red card is actually costing £81.25. To mention about having the importance of getting these fines paid on time. As mentioned, in adult football, the club and the player are jointly responsible. So we will always recommend that as a club, you make payment first, but then you take internal action to make sure you can reclaim the money from the player. That means, and I fully appreciate this is very easy to talk the talk in this, but when you are struggling for players week in, week out, it may actually be harder in reality. But we would always recommend club makes the payment first. If the player then fails to make payment internally within a couple of weeks, they're suspended internally until payment is made. So no pay, no play. There should be formal demands in writing for payments, and you should have internal late fees to make sure that you're getting, again, covering those late costs that may be coming into the club. And if all of that fails, then the FA does offer a debt recovery process, which I will cover in a bit more detail shortly. Should mention, when it comes to youth players, a youth player cannot be held accountable for their fine. Can't expect that every 12 or 13-year-old has got a paper round. I'm not even sure paper rounds exist these days. However, you can have policies in place to pass that payment on to the parents of those players. And then again, if the parents aren't making payments, then there's nothing to stop the club taking internal action to rest that player or issue some kind of sporting penalty to push their parents to make payment, whether that is reduced playing time. Opportunities like that would exist to kind of help use a little bit of a stick to push for payment. So I mentioned about these accumulation fees and a couple of different models that may be available to a club to manage them and to budget for them going through the season. So we've got 4 different alternatives here that we're going to run through quickly. The first would be to pay for these additional misconduct charges out of general club finances. Now, the benefits of this, as a club, you're responsible for all of that. So provided you are managing your accounts and you always have a surplus in the bank, you know that you'll be able to pick up the cost of that fine, whether it's £75, £150, whatever it may be, at the point it's incurred. You're not going to then be facing late fees, and you avoiding that additional administration of chasing all the players to try to get it back. However, on the flip side, The downsides to this, you've got to then, like I say, make sure you've got enough in reserve to cover those costs. So then you must budget for potential charges. If you're not doing that, it may then impact the resources or other budget lines. If you are putting money aside for a new kit and suddenly you've got to fork out 150 quid to the county for your fourth multiplayer misconduct charge of the season, then obviously you may not have the funds available to buy that new kit. And then purely from an accountability perspective, the individual players whose poor behavior has contributed towards this fine are not actually being held accountable for their behavior. They're not facing any kind of penalty or disadvantage for it, other than perhaps waiting a bit longer for a new kit. So second option then would be to charge the players for a potential future misconduct charge at the time of their offence. So this means I pick up a caution this Saturday, and rather than paying £12, which is the amount the caution costs, actually I'm paying £15. So I'm contributing to the club towards a bigger pool to mitigate for any future offences. Benefits of this, it avoids having to go back to the players later in the season. I mean, one of the real disadvantages with this accumulation structure is that I may pick up a caution the first weekend of the season, pay my 12 quid, happy as Larry, all's done and dusted. Suddenly gets to April and we hit that threshold for 75 points and there's a £100 fine. So in this situation, you would be avoiding having to then come back to me 6 months later and say, you know, that yellow card you picked up months and months and months ago, well, actually, we need a bit more money for this. Pay it up front. As I say, it should hopefully guarantee that additional fees can be paid promptly. It assigns the cost of additional fees proportionately to the offenders or the offence. Because again, you can do this on a sliding scale. You can say, you know, if you pick up a caution, you'll know an extra £3, we'll round it up to £15. If you pick up a red card for violent conduct, and it's supposed to be £55. Actually, we're going to charge you an extra tenner on top of that to make it proportionate to the cautions. Another massive benefit of this is it avoids any issues if that player has left the club after incurring penalties. I mentioned about if I pick up a caution the first weekend of the season. Well, actually, if the club as a whole suddenly hit that threshold in April for the additional misconduct charge, but I've left the club in November, it's going to be hard for you as the club to come back to me and try to get that extra £3. Or there's very little incentive pretty much for that player to suddenly pay £3 to a club he no longer belongs to. And if you do get to the end of the season and you haven't incurred that extra fine, well, you know what? That surplus can be invested back into the club, can be reimbursed to the player, or can go towards some kind of reward for the players, such as going behind the bar for an end of season party. You're not saying as a club you're going to, you know, fritter away that money. It could be done as a deposit, or it can go towards those benefits, and then a celebration for, you know, actually not picking up any of these additional fees and being a well-behaved club. In terms of downsides on this model, the players may object to being charged for potential fines they haven't yet incurred. Again, transparency and communication is key. Explain, you know, they'll get it back or it will go behind the bar, whatever it may be. Explain what will happen if it's not spent. And you need to work out, as I say, an appropriate sliding scale for all of those potential additional fees that may be incurred. So you might say, well, why don't we just charge the players for that offence at the point that the additional misconduct charges come in? I mentioned already the danger that is if a player's left the club and having to suddenly go back for an offence that they committed months and months ago. However, on the plus side, you know that those additional costs are being proportionate to the offender. You know, if I picked up a £3 caution and somebody else has picked up a £12 caution and somebody else has picked up a £55 red card, it's probably not fair to allocate the additional misconduct charge evenly. And the players are only charged when those additional misconduct charges are applied. So you're not trying to get money in advance, you're only enacting this when you need to. Final option is the utilitarian one, which is that you charge all players equally for additional misconduct charges. Now you might say, why should, you know, a player that hasn't committed an offence all season suddenly have to contribute a tenner or something towards a general club misconduct charge? Well, actually encourages collective responsibility for behaviour on the pitch. Again, you're only charging the players when those additional fees are applied. And each player is actually going to be responsible for a relatively small amount. So therefore, hopefully, on a player-by-player case, it's financially manageable. However, you do run that risk. Again, the actual offenders may have left the club, and other players are then going to be responsible for them, whether that's fair or not. And as mentioned, well-behaved players must then pay, or will then find themselves paying for fines incurred by poorly behaved teammates. Across all four of those different scenarios, it really is for the club to decide what is going to be best for you and best for your players, depending on the nature of the club, the age groups involved, the personalities of the players, perhaps your own club situation. Hopefully, it gives you four useful different options. You can see the pros and the cons, and then pick the one that is most applicable to your club. If you do struggle to get money back from a club, as I mentioned, from a player, as I mentioned before, we do have a debt recovery system in place. Now, I want to stress this is the only way that a player will be suspended for non-payment of fines. There is a perception sometimes in grassroots football that a club just needs to contact the county FA and say, Joe Bloggs hasn't paid us back for a caution from earlier in the season. Can you please suspend them until it's paid? The answer is no. We have to go through a formal process, and that's to make sure we're being fair to all people. We're being fair this way to the club, to the volunteers, but also to the player. And the responsibility for us to ensure that fairness is to educate everybody and make sure you're aware of what the process is. Now, it is a debt recovery process, so hopefully it makes sense that the club must have made that payment first. We can't go after the player if the club haven't paid the fine, because at that point, actually, no debt's been incurred. You'll just be under suspension until it's paid. So the club must have incurred the debt and must have made payment to the county. And there are some quite tight restrictions in here. So I mentioned before that we advise that formal demands are put in writing to the player. That's because we need them if it comes to a debt recovery process. We need to be able to see that the player's been, formally charged for the fines, written to say this is how you make payment, this is the deadline for it, and it has to be formal. Text messages, WhatsApps, Facebook Messenger, whatever it may be, isn't sufficient. Email is fine, but it needs to be something that is formal and in writing. There are also restrictions around the timelines here. So the debt itself must have been incurred within the past 112 days, so 3 and a bit months. And the club must have formally demanded payment and failed to receive payment within 28 days. So effectively, you've got to give the player a little bit of time to make good on the payment to you as the club before we're going to put them under suspension. And there's a £25 minimum debt. So yeah, these regulations and requirements are on our website. They're in the FA handbook. They will be shared if any club comes to us looking for support around this, but it is worth bearing in mind and making sure you have a robust procedure in place to claim money back in the first place. On the screen now is effectively our recommended model for how to manage the process. So the date of the offence, or the weekend of the offence, within a couple of days of it, the county FA is going to raise the charge and the club will receive notice of the fine. And the club needs to acknowledge the case, and we, as I say, we always recommend making payment there and then to the county FA. And then the club needs to inform the player of the fine and request payment from them at the next training session or match. That takes us through that first week. If the players fail to make payment the next weekend, so the weekend after the offence, then we'll give them a little bit of grace. We'll give them until the next week to make payment, but let them know that if they don't, you will suspend them internally. So you don't come to the match next week with the money for the red card or for money for the caution you picked up last week, well, you're not going to get played. So if after week 2 the player fails to make payment again, at that point we would recommend formally writing to them demanding payment and giving them 28 days to make that payment, and then bench them internally. As I say, they're not allowed to play until that payment's made. So if after another 28 days, so at this point we're 6 weeks after the offence, the player is still not making payment to the club, at that point we'd recommend the club contacts the county FA to launch that debt recovery action. We then contact the player directly. We say it's been escalated up to us, and you have 21 days now to make payment to us at the county. The point that they make payment, we will reimburse the club and lift a suspension if it's been applied. But if the player fails to make payment to us within 21 days, they will be placed under suspension from all football nationally until that payment is made. So at the quickest, you're looking at about 9 weeks. You obviously can extend those if you want to give more grace, by all means do. Just make sure you're not going beyond that 112 day from the date of the offence. Final piece of responsibility I want to take a look at around the role of the treasurer is around annual reporting. So the vast majority of our clubs will be unincorporated member associations. So you're not legal bodies, you're not providing financial statements to Companies House or the Charities Commission. However, there is still a responsibility to share annual accounts and an annual financial report to your club members. It will be, hopefully is written into your club rules that this is a requirement at an annual general meeting. Reason for this is effectively good. All the reasons for good governance. It means there's transparency. It means there's accountability. There's integrity of the officers. If the club members who are putting the money into the club feel that the people running the club are not running it properly, gives them an opportunity to then challenge those individuals and potentially remove them from the club management committee. We always say they should be at least verified, so someone else has had a look at them and said, yes, this matches, this all adds up, this matches what's in the bank account. Potentially for the larger clubs, and particularly those that are registered charities or limited companies, you may then want to consider making sure they are formally audited. And if you are one of those clubs that's incorporated or legal charity, would make sure you look at the resources available out there to make sure you know what your legal responsibilities are around financial reporting. The county FA has the right to demand your products and loss or balance sheet. We don't make that mandatory for our affiliation, but it's just that if we do have any concerns around financial irregularities, we do have the ability and power to request those so that we can take a look and identify if there are any concerns. So I want to move now on to the technical platforms that the FA have available to help with managing the club. These are the three principal ones across running a grassroots football club. I'm not going to touch them full time because that's very much around match day administration. If you do want to see more information about that, the FA run webinars, touch on it a bit more in our secretary and chair induction sessions. I will dive into Club Portal and Whole Game though. Whole Game system has been around for about the last 8 years and was the home of football administration. It is, however, being gradually phased out over the course of the next 12 to 18 months or so. So for the 23-24 season, all you need to know is that any disciplinary cases will be administered through Whole Game system and paid through the Whole Game system. I'll come on to show you how to do that in a second. Every other aspect, though, of running a grassroots club now is done through the FA Club Portal. So this is where you'll see your main club dashboards. You can keep track of things like sponsors, your legal status, and so forth. You can update your officials and who's running the club, who's running each team. It's where you do your affiliate your teams each year now, where you can see your England football accreditation, your player registrations, and so forth. And then hopefully from 24-25 season onwards, that will also be where you manage and pay for discipline. So let me just share my other screen quickly. I can show you these in reality. If my gaze is now past, it's because I've got a second screen up, so I'm just looking at that to be able to run this properly. So this is the Whole Game system. When you initially log in, you'll see there are a series of tabs down the left-hand side, and those are your personal information sections. A lot of those, however, will now just automatically divert you to Club Portal. The only one that we're going to look at is Dashboard, effectively. And then across the top are all of the different clubs and league roles that you may have. I want to go on to, it's going to go into Dashboard, but it doesn't, I think because I'm logged in as a treasurer, it only shows me invoices. So ignore the invoices on this area. This would be invoices against you as an individual. So if you are a football intermediary, you would pay your IMS invoice fee through here. As a club role, though, it's irrelevant. So as a club treasurer, if you're logging in to pay a discipline fine, you would just click on the relevant club up along the top, and then you will come onto the club dashboard. You'll see a summary of the club here, including the amount that is outstanding in whole game, and you'll also see standard notifications from the club. This is where you'll see notice around club suspensions if if the cautions or red cards go unpaid any longer, and also you'll be notified of any invoices that have been raised. In this one, I can see that there's various invoices that have been raised and late payments invoices for non-payment of the original disciplinary fine. Right down at the bottom then, you've got outstanding invoices and a downward arrow. If I click on that, it expands and you can see all outstanding invoices that need payment. Through these, you can select them and you can choose to pay all or part of each of these fines. Once you've selected the invoices you want to pay, if you just click on the pay button here, it will then give you the option to go through and make payments on all of them on bulk. It's all done online, and as soon as payment's made, if you have incurred a suspension for non-payment, that suspension will be lifted immediately. That's why we always encourage people to pay through the FA platforms. Saves any delays in us at the county having to reconcile payments, download them from our bank account and apply them manually. This will do it all automatically for you. You'll also then get an email receipt once you have made payments. Looking at portal then, as a club treasurer, most important tab will be this payments one down at the bottom, and this is where you will see any outstanding or the status of all affiliation invoices. So from this season, affiliation has now been managed through club portal. We are pushing clubs to make payments effectively as soon as they submit an affiliation application. But if you have if you're separating that responsibility so that the secretary goes through and adds all the teams, and then you as the treasurer will go in separately to make payments, this is where you will see those invoices. The status then would be unpaid, and all you would need to do is click into the invoice, and down at the bottom there would be a tab that says make payment. If you ever want to go back in and download a paid invoice, just so you've got it for your records, you can also do that through here. Just click on the download invoice and it will download through your browser. So those are the only two sections that I wanted to share quickly around the FA technology platforms. Hopefully it all makes sense and shows just how quick and easy managing a lot of this is. I am just going to go back into my treasurer induction, make sure I find the right one. There we go. And when it comes up, it should give me an opportunity to resume. There we go. If you do get stuck on any aspect of the FA technology platforms, this is a really valuable and useful website to have bookmarked. It's grassrootstechnology.freshdesk.com/support/home. This is the FA's technology help desk, effectively. So they will have how-to guides, frequently asked questions, video run-throughs for all of their technology platforms and all the main functionality. So if you are stuck on how to access an invoice for an affiliation or for a disciplinary case, if you head onto this website, you'll be able to find a guide which will take you through how to find it, how to make payments on it. We've recognised that it's a really useful platform that the FA put in, but it only looks at their technology systems. So we are looking to create our own version, but looks around all offline aspects of managing a club. This is a new platform that's going to get released during September 2023, and we'll have a whole load of how-to guides, FAQs, help articles, all around other aspects of club and league administration. So things like regulations around approaching players, how to join a league, how to access development funding and so forth will all be available through that. And the website is bucksfa.freshdesk.com. The website is live. We are still building the content at the moment, but if you do want to take a look, you will be able to see how we're doing on there. And finally, I wanted to direct you towards Sport England's Club Matters website. This is, I found a massive resource for myself, set up by Sport England. So it's looking across all different sports, but there are a wealth of resources available on this website about all different aspects of how to run a grassroots community sports club. The financial management section in particular is really useful. It's got template budgets, template kind of account reports, talks you through your responsibilities, talks you through best practice about how to manage a club, the financials of a club, how to make sure there is appropriate, delegated financial responsibilities and so forth. So I'd really recommend taking a look through that website if you haven't done already, just to see the kind of resources that are available there and see if you can pick up any tips. Outside of our online resources, we then provide additional support here at the county. As I mentioned way back at the very beginning, it's one of our key roles here to support volunteers in the grassroots football community, whether that is just through picking up the phone, responding to emails, supporting any kind of queries that may come in, to regular CPD and information sessions across the football community. So whether that is role specific like tonight, whether it's to announce or to review kind of how different grants are going to be, what different grants are going to be available and how they're administered. Keep your eyes peeled for all the different resources we have coming out from the County FA. And with that, I just want to say a massive thank you for joining us today. I hope you found the induction session useful. Hope it's given you a bit of a new perspective and some food for thought for managing your role going forward. As I mentioned before, we have done similar induction sessions for club secretaries and chairs and welfare officers, and those are all available on our YouTube channel. If you do have any feedback, if you do have any questions, then please feel free to contact us at support@berks-bucksfa.com. Thank you.